Hi everyone. This is a recording of a LinkedIn live event. It was supposed to be live, but I couldn't do it because of COVID and I couldn't speak. So anyway, catching up on my apologies that it's late, but I thought I'd carry on. Um, this was titled 10 Tips from Camera to Mesh. And when I read the title, I thought, ooh, can I do 10? And then when I actually started writing, I got to over like 150. So this is just the first 10. And hopefully I'll go on to do some more of these and explain a bit more about the little parts of the spatial imagery workflows, how you use a camera, how you take that imagery and you do all these different things with it, whether it's point cloud colorization or photogrammetry or nerfs or Gaussian splats or whatever we're talking about. But what I'm focusing on, and what I focus on personally, is just the quality of the imagery, because that's the be all and end all of all these processes. Without good quality imagery, without good exposure, good focus, good detail, an awful lot of the processes just fall apart. So that's what the point of this is. And so what I thought I'd do is come up with 10 tips that I think are really important in the workflow, based on a lot of years of heartache and mistakes that I don't want you to make. Our problem really of photogrammetry, there's sort of, I say there's two types of spatial imagery, but we're going to talk about photogrammetry particularly and how we move from an image to mesh. Photogrammetry in a studio environment is really straightforward. You get the lighting right, turntable right, the coverage right. The problem that we have is when we go to do photogrammetry outside, whether we're using drones or handheld or 360, is, as you can see on my face right now, light changes, and the light will change during the recording of this, and light changes pretty well every second. And the problem we have there is we need to have consistency of the imagery to help us in processing things, as we'll explain. But I just thought I'd give you a few tips and we'll try and rattle through them. So I'll just add my things. So you will hear me talk a lot about formats, and a lot of everyone who knows anything about photogrammetry would advise you to shoot in raw format. Now, I know that that's not always possible. Your drones, some of the cameras don't allow you to do that. But we're talking about some tips. If you are going to do photogrammetry and you're going to try and produce the best quality imagery you can, you have to have the ability not just to look at the image that your camera captured at that minute, but be able to do things later to it to improve its quality, to retrieve data in the shadows or highlights, change colors, change exposures. We're trying to produce consistency, and the ability to shoot in RAW, while it does have its problems in terms of buffering and times to download, file sizes and things, the advantages that it gives you just outweighs all the other considerations in my view. So tip number one, pick a camera, pick a format, that allows you to shoot in RAW. Now, there are lots of different sorts of RAW formats depending on the camera. RAW is basically just the sensor data, and a RAW file you can't print. You have to convert it to something else. There are two different sorts of RAW file floating around that we use in photogrammetry. There's the proprietary RAW, so Nikon, Sony, Fuji, Capture One have their own, Phase One have their own proprietary one. But you can convert them into digital negatives, and using Capture One or Lightroom, which are RAW editing tools, which will convert it into a format that you can actually tweak and view. There are now some compressed versions of RAW as well. So Phase One have their own dedicated Phase One to compress the size of the RAW file, which is brilliant news. But number one, shoot in RAW whenever you possibly can. Tip number two, when you're exposing your camera is calculating the right exposure to use for that environment, it generally takes an average of across the whole sensor range. That's great. And you can use things like zebras or blinking devices to show where you're getting overexposure. But what you won't see is the little dots, the little reflections in the stone, the little bleeds around the outside, where you are going to get overexposure. Shadows, it turns out, are quite easy to reconcile and retrieve, but exposing for the highlights is critical to maintain the data in white areas, pale areas, places of reflection, because if you don't, it's almost impossible to retrieve that data. It's data lost. All these things are just like tips. I do a lot more, as you probably were, I do a lot more training to explain exactly how you do that. But start looking at these things. There's loads of information online, on YouTube, on tons and tons of information on how to make your photographs pretty, more artistic, how to process them. That's great. But what we're doing is something slightly different. We're looking at not pretty pictures or award-winning this or something you want to put on your wall. We're looking at data. Expose for the highlights. And if you don't know what that means, find out. There's loads of information on YouTube out there. I'll give you some recommendations if you want me to drop me a line about where to go with people who talk sense, and you're going to get good information that isn't trying to sell you something. Okay, and next one is try and slow down your process. The art and science of photogrammetry is about studying and getting the best quality. It's not the same as speed, and productivity can equate to poor quality. This is all about the quality of the imagery, so don't rush things. Personally, for example, I shoot almost all my ground stuff with a tripod, which would in fact slow it down. But because I'm doing that, I can use longer exposures and I can get better quality, reduce the noise, so I've got less processing later on. Sometimes more haste is less speed, and the more you can do in the field to reduce your processing time later on is going to be a huge thing. So it's actually about slowing down and taking your time and studying things and paying attention to the environment and how the light is changing. Okay, right, so we could talk a lot more about any of these, but this is just a quick. So number 4, one of the things that people get a little bit confused about is the thing called ISO. Now, for you photographers out there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But basically, it's the sensitivity of the sensor. In darker environments, I can increase the sensitivity, so I can get faster exposures and things. The problem with that has always been that you will start to get noise in the shadows and the dark exposed areas, and also in the midtones as well. Now, noise is really important that we try and eliminate it, because if you try to do any sharpening, then it will just exaggerate the noise. But the real reason it's important is because when the SIFT algorithm and the stitching algorithm it's looking for patterns, and the noise that you get is random. So it will not see the same patterns in adjacent photographs or whichever photographs it's using for getting the tie-in points. The good news now is there's a whole series of tools which will allow you to change and eliminate the noise to a great degree, almost like 4 f-stops. So you could be shooting at ISO of 1600, but some of the noise reduction algorithms that you can buy and you can use will reduce it down to an ISO 100. Some of the stuff is amazing. So don't worry too much about ISO. However, don't use auto ISO. Use everything you manually set and lock it. Okay, so number 4, don't be afraid of bumping up your ISO. Things have got a lot easier, and you don't have to worry too much about the shadows and loss of detail and the noise that will give you false registrations, if any registration. You've got big areas of shadows, it won't see the tie points in there if you've got noise, because they're just randomly generated. There's a lot more to talk about noise. Noise is a really important consideration in photogrammetry, and if you come on one of my training courses, then we talk a lot about noise. just as one example, noise increases as temperature increases. So if you're shooting on a hot sunny day, the chances are that you will get more noise, even though you don't think you should be getting it. And likewise, if the battery, or you've been using the video component of the camera, it gets warm and overheats. Ambient temperature can have a big impact on noise, and that's just one example. But don't worry too much about it. We can sort that out. The next one, actually, was that slide 5? I've missed 5. Sorry, I've missed number 6. Okay, I've missed 5 out. We'll come up with number 5. I've got loads. So number 6. It's really about understanding how light in your place, and when I mean place, I mean the environment, how it's working, what's happening to it. Have you got bright sun? Is it diffuse? Are you getting reflections off other buildings, off concrete, off water, off internal lights? Photography is all about light drawing. That's what it means. And so I look at a scene, and as a surveyor, I've often looked at lines of sight. There was the fewest stations I can see to get the maximum amount of detail. I look more at a site to see where the light is falling, and that's really important because it will help you plan the route and the timing of things. It can be a real issue with light changes during the day. So, for example, a north-facing building from, a couple of times in September will never get any direct sunlight on it. However, the south, west, and east faces will. And so if you're trying to produce an homogeneous version, knowing which order to do things in can make a big difference in terms of the amount of work you've got to do when you start processing and trying to make it so it all looks the same. With that, it's all about, for me, I do an awful lot of pre-planning work before I get onto site. And there's a couple of apps that I could recommend to help you. The first one is one called Photopills, which is just an amazing tool that allows you to do all sorts of stuff. If you're a photographer, you already probably know about this. But if you're not, you need this because it'll help you do all sorts of interesting things. But there's also another app called Sun Surveyor. And what that allows me to do is identify a location and see where is the sun going to be? Where do I start? So as an example, if if it's going to be a bright sunny day, you may want to shoot some of the surfaces when it's more in shade. Can't always do that. And that's one of the issues is photogrammetry outside. We can't stop just because it's sunny. We've got shadows. We don't have to. A lot of people think you do. But if you use some of the tricks and tips and things that I recommend, then you can fly in any light conditions. Not obviously, darkness, complete darkness, but even then you can still do stuff. But it's the brightness which actually causes us the most issues. It's the overexposure from white faces, reflective surfaces in stonework. But it's also to do with the depth of the shadows and the contrast, the dynamic range between the brightest bright and the darkest shadow. Apps like this will help you before you go out to figure out where do you start. With the weather forecast as well. So a critical one I don't put on here will be a weather app. What's the weather going to be like? Are you going to be raining? Is it going to be shadows? Because you look at it and go cloudy weather and you go, yes, it's going to make life a lot simpler. And whether we've got cloud cover, especially in some parts of the world, it doesn't exist. So one of these tools will help you figure out the order that you maybe need to capture data on a building or a structure. Anyway, I find it really useful, and I don't go playing about with it beforehand. Of course, Google Maps and things like that will help you, but some of these, like for example, the Sun Surveyor basically uses Google Street View satellite imagery to locate and then show you where the shadows are going to be at different times of the day or night as well. You might be shooting in moonlight, who knows. Let's jump on to the next tip. Right, so I spend an awful lot of time editing my images pre-registration and pre-mesh workflow. And there are probably two major editing suites which a lot of people use. Lightroom is one a lot of people know about. Capture One, not so many people know about it, but professional photographers will. And also, if you're a Phase 1 camera user, you will know about this because those are the people who created it. It's now split off into a separate company. They both have advantages. Lightroom probably currently, with its new integration of some of Adobe's AI tools, is probably a little bit ahead in terms of editing images for replacement and things like that. However, Capture One is probably better if you want to zoom in for detail. Both of them are great, and you need at least one of them. I have both. I have a much longer presentation about Lightroom versus Capture One and how you use it to recover detail in shadows, remove shadows, maintain color, improve sharpness, reduce blurring, how they work with AI, and how you use both of these and another software, which we'll talk about in another process, to batch process imagery. Lightroom and Capture One are really designed for professional or photographers to improve single images, but we're not working with a single image, we're working with lots. So there are ways that you can work with this. Let's move on to number 8, batch processing. All these tools allow you to tag images, to color code them or star rate them. So one of the important processes is to look at the images and then to batch them into blocks of similar exposure, because the light will be changing. It's very difficult to apply a universal adjustment across all the images. You can, if it's a cloudy day and you're just trying to increase stuff, but what you do have is the ability to section the images into different areas of similar exposure, and then process them separately. Don't get too bothered about that, but there are some really important tools that you use in these editing softwares, as I say, color tagging or star rating, and then you can filter and export these based on their different characteristics. It's something you should understand and use. It's a great tool for productivity. It can save you an awful lot of time. If we move on to number 10, now the problem we have with all this software before we tweak it is we can keep going and going and going. There is a point in your life where you think, is good enough good enough? And to be honest, there's no easy answer to this. It's largely subjective and based on experience. I would suggest if you spend more than half an hour on any pre-processing of photogrammetry images, you've probably done enough. Maybe an hour if you've got big varying light conditions during the mission. But we've got but we can talk more about that as part of, we talk more about that in part of the training courses that we do. I'd like to be able to give you a really easy answer to this, but it is about experience, and photogrammetry is not just simply about pressing a button and get a 3D model out of it. That's its most basic. And for me, it's a bit like, if you can do that, it's a bit like saying turn a tap on, now you're a fireman. There is so much to photogrammetry and what you can do. But the decision is always, is it good enough for your client's needs? Is it good enough for what you want? Okay, so that's all I wanted to do just for this quick presentation. If you've got any questions, if you've got any queries, if you want more information about certain aspects of what I'm talking about, please drop me a line. My email's above, or go through the website. You can get me on LinkedIn, and you'll also get me on some of my videos on YouTube, and we're just about to launch our new YouTube channel, Photogrammetry Raw. Anyway, that's it for now. Thanks for your time and your patience. We'll be able to do some more of these, I hope, in the coming weeks. But thank you. And as I say, if you've got any questions, please feel free to get in touch. All right. Thank you very much. You take care now.